Each year, hundreds of people are reported missing in our parks and forests. Most are eventually found, but there's a smaller category of cases that never get solved, including a few close to home. The I-Team's George Knapp is here with the story. George.
It's not a revelation to say that people get lost out in the wilderness or in forest areas. We're talking about a different kind of mystery, though. Disappearances that are not caused by predator attacks or criminals hiding out there in the woods or just bad luck. A former cop has put together hundreds of case files regarding clusters of missing persons in national parks where the circumstances are flat out strange. But don't expect any answers from the Park Service.
At the end of the night, I was staying in a motel off the government or off the Park Service land, and I get a knock on the door.
The person who confided in law enforcement veteran David Paulides was a government employee who told one heck of a story about people who vanish in national parks, places like Yosemite, but also national forests, including the Toyabe, west of Las Vegas. In the years since the knock at the door, Paulides has scoured small-town newspaper archives and pestered federal agencies for records. He found so many cases of missing people that a planned book became two, filled with more than 400 cases of people who went into national parks but never came out.
People disappear in the wilds all the time, and we're talking about something different. These were unusual things that don't make sense, that happen to cluster together in 3 to 4, sometimes as many as 20, 30 people missing at one location.
The individual cases are strange enough, Paulides says, but stranger still were the reactions of federal agencies when he asked for public records.
And when we FOIA'd them, we got a response back that they don't keep any lists of missing people.
The response was not only no, but hell no, he says. So he began putting his own list together and discovered what appears to be nearly 30 clusters of disappearances in national parks and forests, cases which meet a narrow set of odd characteristics. The people who vanish often do so right under the noses of others, in many cases of kids, their parents' noses.
Being parents and being responsible people, we understand there's no way my son or daughter wouldn't know the way back from being just down the road getting the ball.
But it happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
The missing defy logic. They hike uphill, for instance, often steep climbs. Children as young as 2 or 3 are found a day or two later many miles away and over mountain ranges.
Some kids are found in phenomenal distances away that would make no logical sense to any parent.
Weird things happen to their clothing. The missing often shed their clothes right away, even in bad weather. Clothes are found sometimes neatly folded, but not the people.
The ranger described to me, if you were standing straight up and you just had your shirt or just had your pants on and you melted directly into your pants, that's what it looked like to him. The pants were laying on the ground in a very neat pile.
The missing defy normal search and rescue practices. Bodies are found in places that are all but inaccessible, or they're found in the open, in areas that were repeatedly searched earlier. Bloodhounds or other tracker dogs are often befuddled.
If the dog can't find a scent, that's a red flag. If a dog, a canine dog, a trained dog, is put on the scent at the point last seen, and it lays down and it doesn't want to track anymore, red flag. And that happens more than you think.
Nevada doesn't have a major cluster, but it has plenty of cases. Children who vanished around Lake Tahoe, in the center of the state near Tonopah, and at Mount Charleston. In 1966, 6-year-old Larry Jeffrey of Henderson disappeared while playing with his 2 brothers, setting off a massive 16-day search by as many as 1,000 men. Former Sheriff Ralph Lamb remembers it clearly.
Walked away from camp. Never did hear from him, never did see him, never did find him. We had hundreds of people there working, almost shoulder to shoulder.
There's no large predators per se. So we can't worry about mammals taking him. And he was in a fairly remote area where there's no vehicular access, so there's no car abduction. This boy just walked into oblivion. And in an age where you have aircraft up looking for the boy, you have 800 people scouring the mountain.
You should be able to find him.
That coupled with, if he was deceased, part of that ongoing effort is bringing in cadaver dogs. The odor coming off the body, they should have found that. They didn't.
Other aspects of this mystery are even more bizarre, though difficult to explain in just a couple of minutes. Example, many of the vanished who are found alive are kids too young to speak, or kids who can't communicate because of disabilities. Some who are found alive say they can't remember what happened to them. In his books, David Paulides reports on why some obvious explanations simply don't apply here, but he stops short of giving his own theory or explanation. Paulides says he doesn't want to scare people away from visiting parks, but thinks people need to be made aware. A month ago, we asked the Park Service and the Forest Service for their lists of local missing persons cases. Still waiting. We have links and more information about all this stuff on our website. Check it out.
Hundreds of thousands of people visit national parks each year, but you might not realize that a number of those people go missing.
Yep, that's the focus of a brand new book. It's called Missing 411. Retired police officer David Paulides is here. He logged more than 7,000 hours to investigate the disappearances of 411 people from national parks. Good morning, David. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
So 7 years it took you to research all of this. And when first thing I saw in this book we were looking at, and she read a good portion of it, I was able to skim it, the first thing that jumped out to me was clusters. What exactly does that mean when it comes to this book here?
So during the research of finding missing people that disappeared in the rural areas of North America, including Canada, we found that there were 28 different clusters of missing people, geographical clusters, that were never talked about and never known before. And that was a highly unusual find on our part.
Was it something it wasn't talked about because no one had ever really discovered the relationship between all of the disappearances, and you kind of found that there were these clusters that had something in common?
There isn't a lot of statistical data or a lot of public data that's available on missing people, especially historical data that maybe goes back 100 years. And putting the pieces together to see that the clusters come together and there is historical significance to it is something you don't hear about. We didn't understand it when we started.
I was so surprised to find out that one of the longest list of people missing is actually from Yosemite, right? For the western region, in fact. And it's so close to us. And I was just there in January. Hard to believe. And you say that it's actually been difficult to get some information about the missing cases.
So when we started the project, we understood that the National Park System has a large law enforcement presence. And law enforcement is known to keeping a lot of data. Missing people, homicides, robbery, etc. Well, so we attempted to get information from them through the use of Freedom of Information Act. And we filed dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests for this data. We got information back that they didn't keep lists of missing people, locally at Yosemite or at any other national park, and at a national level. And when we requested the data, the national parks came back and stated that they were going to charge us $34,000 for a list of missing people from Yosemite, and they wanted $1.4 million for a list of missing people nationally. And they stated that they just don't keep that data.
That's kind of shocking because it would seem to me like it makes sense that a park, a national park of this size, would be probably the first place where people would go missing. You would need that information. But no, not so much.
I think that they have the information. They don't want the public to know the information at this point. And we work with guys that are heads of large law enforcement departments in the United States. And their statement to me was, these people are not stupid. Yeah. They understand the need to keep this information. They just don't want to give it up at this point.
Exactly.
And you said, I was reading in the beginning here, that you actually, this all started just a conversation that you had with the ranger several years back.
Several years ago, about 3.5, 4 years ago, a ranger came up to me and said, hey, there's some disappearances at several parks I've worked at. And I think somebody needs to take a hard look at it because when the people disappear, there's a lot of publicity on the front end.
Right.
Soon after they disappear, you don't hear anything. There are some young kids under 10 years old that are missing from national parks. You never hear about them. Once they're gone, they're gone. They don't give them a lot of publicity. And it's a very disturbing fact.
This is the third book in a series. It's called Missing 411, Missing 411, North America and Beyond. Stories, these are strange stories, of people who have flat disappeared in remote locations of North America and 5 other countries. The author is David Paulides, and he is back with us tonight to talk about his brand new book and has given us 2 hours of very intriguing conversation in the past. How are you, Dave? Welcome back.
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Good. I noticed Whitley Strieber wrote the back cover endorsement for the book. He says, David has shined a light onto one of the greatest and most disturbing mysteries of our time, the simple and awful fact that people disappear, especially in our national parks, and little effort, if any, is made to find them, let alone inform the public about the danger. Even when massive searches are mounted and people are found, the events surrounding their loss and recovery are often far beyond logical explanation. This is the most comprehensive and expertly presented series of books on this subject ever written, and this latest volume, which includes stories from 5 countries, is sobering, chilling, and far too well researched to ignore. It is essential reading. Whitley Strieber. All right, this is Missing 411. This book seems to be bigger than the other ones.
Yeah, I got rolling on it, and I didn't realize how big it was. And there's a lot of information in there. We happen to get data from other countries, so that was something that was new and unexpected, and it just grew to the size it is today.
What were the 5 other countries, first of all?
So it's a thrush of Europe, some couple of islands off of India, and Malaysia, and it's probably something that I had never heard of before, and some people sent me some information about an incident, and it started with France along a river in the late 1950s. A woman was walking along a river there, and she felt as though some kind of force came over her and grabbed her from behind. She could see a dark-colored, huge hand grab her up her chest and start to drag her into a thorny bush area. She started to scream. She heard a voice up above her say something. And at about that time, the weather started to change. It started to thunder, rain, and it was immediate. And the voice said something like, "Well, here you go," as though he's delivering her to somebody. And then all of a sudden, everything stopped, and she ran to a nearby farm. And the farmer said that he could see a large hand that had grabbed her chest, and there was a red mark there. They called the police. The police wrote a report about it. And the elements of that incident mimic 80% of what I write about in the 3 books.
That's spooky stuff. She was lucky.
Very lucky.
This suggests an abduction of a paranormal caliber, and I wonder if you see a pattern over time where the same kind of thing, maybe there are abductions of people being perpetrated by a group or something, a consciousness. She couldn't see what it was, but she felt it.
And could hear it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that kind of got us all rolling years ago was that after you review hundreds and hundreds of cases where people disappear in the woods, and you read reports that are emanated by the Freedom of Information Act and media reports, we started to see the same sort of things time after time after time. Namely, when a search is started, canines won't track or can't find a track. Sometimes
I remember that from our other visits, yeah.
Exactly. Sometimes you bring the canine to the scene and they'll just lay down, or they'll walk in circles and lay down. A lot of times after the person disappears, there's a bad weather-related event that impugns the progress of the search team. All of these are rural, and we eliminate all possibility if it's a drowning or a possible suicide or it's a possible animal attack. Dogs are involved in a lot of these cases, meaning that people disappear with their dogs. An abnormal amount of these cases involve disabled people. It seems that many times when you get to the 7th, 8th day and law enforcement can't find the people, in almost every one of these cases they start talking about kidnapping or abduction. And that's law enforcement talking about that.
All right, you just said 2 words, kidnapping and abduction. What's the difference in those 2 words to you, Dave?
I don't really know if there is one. I think they're somewhat synonymous. I think with kidnapping, people tend to think there's some reward at the end of the tunnel. And whereas an abduction, there might not be any reward that's ever generated. But the differences are subtle.
Got it. Okay. Well, abduction, of course, has that other connotation that suggests an off-planet abduction. And we don't know about that either. I guess what we have to say here is that there are so many different kinds of things that have happened to people. It's almost impossible to rule anything out.
Well, sometimes I like to deviate actually away from what I write and refer to what others have written in kind of support of what our theories are.
Yeah.
And there was an article in OregonLive.com in June 8th this year where the writer talked about the enormous amount of disappearances in the woods of Oregon. And a staggering 189 men, and this is their words, a staggering 189 men and 51 women officially remain listed as missing since 1997 by the Oregon Office of Emergency Management.
That's too many.
It's enormous.
That's too many. That's 15 years. That's too many.
And then they go on and they talk about the type of people that have gone missing. And there's two people that have gone missing in the same area just recently, and that's in the Three Sisters Wilderness area.
That's by Bend, Oregon.
Right. And there's one of the guy's moms, a woman named Cynthia Boucher, 66 from Vancouver, said, "There is a mystery here. Both Jake and Professor Daming Zhu were experienced hikers on wilderness trails.
Mm-hmm.
Two grown men can't simply disappear from the mountain 5 years apart."
No. I don't know where you are on we know where Whitley is on the whole UFO thing, but is it on the table with you that some of these disappearances might be chalked up to ET abductions? We do know cattle mutilations have occurred, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, not just cows, llamas, pigs, sheep, horses, people. They've all been mutilated in the same fashion. It's if we are being watched. Biological work is being done in a fatal, terminal way on many kinds of life forms on this planet. And abductions could be in there too, couldn't they?
So people who have followed the books and followed my interviews, I don't discount anything, and I don't point a finger at anything.
That's right. Now, you've been extremely professional about this whole thing. It'd be very easy for you to go in one direction or another, but you will not do that.
But I should tell people that it's been almost 4.5 years now since we started, and since I was first on your show. And
you're kidding me.
It's been a long time.
Oh, jeez.
And one of the things I think that you get when you're in our position is you get a lot of emails from people who have a lot of theories.
Yeah.
And I could tell you that we've had probably 10 term paper length responses as to what's happening here. And
no kidding. Well, there's another book.
No, well, I mean, it's staggering what the amount of has been generated by people on this. And I think all the people are passionate. All of them are informed. And I think that we all go to that place in our mind that we know the most about. If you know the most about UFOs, maybe you go there. If there's another crypto topic, maybe you go there. And if you're a conspiracy believer and you think that the government might be taking us, maybe you go in that area.
Then you got the satanic cult abductions as well. That's another one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that it's hard to pin one culprit in these because they're so vast. And right now we've identified 34 clusters of these missing people in the U.S. and Canada. 34.
Now remember what I just said. In 15 years, approximately, 230 people, 50-some men and 100 and, what'd you say? I forget the rest.
189 men.
189 men.
Women.
Okay. That's 240 people in 15 years have flat vanished from the Oregon wilderness or hiking trails or national parks. Now, as David and I have talked about in the past, the National Park Service is, shall we say, reticent to talk about this stuff, to put it mildly. We'll discuss a little bit about that as we continue. The book is called Missing 411, and I would urge all of you to read it. It is, especially if you go to national parks. I don't want you to be scared and not go, but you need to have this knowledge before you go. Stories, strange stories, of people, just normal folks, who have disappeared instantly in remote locations of North America and 5 other countries as well.
So the people who haven't heard me before, I'll kind of give you the Reader's Digest version of how we got started. Is years ago I was in a national park doing some peripheral research, and went home, or actually went back to my hotel at the end of the night. Got a knock on the door. A couple people standing there. They said they knew who I was. They were watching me in the park, and they knew my work, and they had read some of my other books, and they said that they had a story to tell, and they thought that someone ought to look into it.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who don't know, national park rangers tend to move park to park, monument to monument every 7 to 8 years. In a career, they may be in 4 or 5 different locations.
Mm-hmm.
These people were senior people, and they said that at the places they were at, there was an abnormal amount of missing people. And then at the front end, when the people originally disappeared for that first 7 days, there was a lot of publicity, there was a lot of follow-up, there was a big effort.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, nothing. And when they tried to follow up and see what happened, they were stonewalled. And they thought that there were an abnormal amount in the parks themselves rather than in the surrounding area, which really was no different than the park. And they said that somebody ought to look into it, somebody with some law enforcement background. So they gave me the info. I drove out of the park. I called some law enforcement people right away, and I said, hey, can you see if there's a lot of people missing from these areas? They called me back in an hour and said, wow, there's something here. Went back home, filed a series of Freedom of Information Act requests against the National Park Service, specifically asking them for a list of the missing people from their system, 189 different parks and monuments, and then a specific list of the missing people from Yosemite National Park. And within about 2 weeks, I got a response that there are no lists of any missing people in the Park Service, either individually or cumulatively, and they were sorry that they couldn't fulfill my request.
Did you laugh, or were you just disgusted?
Well, we were sitting in a room with 3 people, and we both thought it was maybe something in the semantics, the way we wrote the request, so we wrote a second one.
Yeah.
And we got that back about a month and a half later and said, no, we understood your first one. There are no lists. There never have been any lists.
Lies.
So then we said, well, because I was a published author, according to the Freedom of Information Act, there is a author's exemption that you can apply for. We applied for it and said we wanted a list of missing people from Yosemite and from your entire system.
Mm-hmm.
They came back, and this time an attorney called me from the National Park Service, which is always an interesting call.
Yeah.
And he said, first of all, why do you want the information? For your listeners out there that follow and understand the Freedom of Information Act, that is an inappropriate question if it's dealing with their response and whether they're going to give you the information or not. They can't ask that.
Right.
So I explained that I was an author. I was doing some research on a topic. I just wanted the info. And he said, well, we're not going to give you the author's exemption. And his response was, because your books aren't in enough libraries.
Oh, yeah. Jesus.
And I've never heard that before, and we've looked it up, had an attorney look it up, and he says...
You won't hear it again either.
Bogus.
Disgusting.
But he says, I'm going to give you a response where you can get it. He says, if you want the list from our entire system, it's going to cost you and your organization $1.4 million. And if you want it from Yosemite, it's only going to be $34,000.
Uh-huh. So he admitted there was a list, a comprehensive list, and you could get it for 1.4. What a joke.